YouTube channel, and welcome to our monthly Art Matters Artist Talk, this time focused on Creative Aging Month. I'm Kristen Butler, the Director of Programs, and before I hand things over to Sydney, I just wanted to say if you have a Google or YouTube account, go ahead and sign in so that you can join us in the chat and ask questions and send us comments. If you don't have a Google or a YouTube account, you can send questions to virtual@delaplane.org. You're welcome to ask questions at any time, but we'll probably be holding on to the questions toward the end of the discussion. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sydney Dexter, who is our exhibitions manager.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our first Saturday Art Matters discussion. Today we have two of our Creative Aging Month solo exhibitors, Ellen Winkler and Michael Spears, who will be telling us about their artworks currently on view within our galleries and online at Virtual Delaplane. To begin, we welcome Ellen Winkler as she discusses her exhibition entitled Finding Warfield. Ellen?
Hi there, I'm Ellen Winkler. And I want to thank the Delaplane Arts Center and Kristen Butler and Sydney Dexter for making this possible and for helping me as you have so throughout this. I'm going to start a slideshow, I hope. There we go. So the title of my exhibit is Finding Warfield. And I gave it, for the purposes of this talk, Exploring Visual Language. I have been an artist for most of my life, and I would say that for most of my life, I have been attempting to figure out how to make work that expresses what I see and feel about the world around me. But Finding Warfield particularly started with this building, and this is the Etchison Warfield House. It is located on a farm. It's actually on Route 108, about a half mile or so south of Damascus. It is the farm of Dorothy Warfield. Her family has been on this farm since the middle of the 18th century. It was until about 2000 or so a dairy farm, and it is no longer active. But about 4 years ago, my sister and I were driving around looking for things to photograph. My sister's a gifted photographer, and we were looking for things to photograph. And among other things, we came across this building, and we had to stop. Now, I've been by it several times, many times since, and I want to tell you, it doesn't look quite this good any longer. It's kind of shrinking on itself. I don't expect it'll ever fall over, because underneath all of the metal and the plaster and so forth are good, huge logs. It's a log cabin. But we found it that day and photographed it, and I just took it in. I couldn't get over the incredible shadows cast by the dormer windows, those big shapes in contrast with the delicate shadowy lines of the corrugated metal. I'm a goner for corrugated metal, but I also loved just the odd angles of things, nothing quite lined up, the deep recesses and shadows. This used to be a grander house than it is now. It has 2 stories and it had some beautiful woodwork in it. I've seen photos from a dissertation someone did on the building. But at one time it had 2 chimneys. The stones of the chimneys are over here to the left of the building, or to my right of the building. It had an extension, I think, at the back that housed a kitchen. It was quite a grand building. And but as you can see now, there is not much left of it. I'm told that foxes inhabit the ground floor and buzzards inhabit the top floor. And sure enough, I was drawing it one day, and a fox, I looked up to see a fox about 20 or 30 feet away, and after a little bit, he turned tail and ran into the cornfield nearby. At any rate, I don't know if I said this, but I made the acquaintance of Dorothy Warfield and asked her permission to come on the property and make some studies of this. And eventually, I guess she told me there were more buildings in the back of her property, so I went back there also, but I began here. And as you can tell, I was just so taken with the various views of this thing. This central panel turns out it is a tobacco barn. I did a print of it I called Smokehouse, and I was kind of right, it is a kind of smokehouse. But in any event, I would photograph these things, but I would always go back and work on site. I prefer to do that and made all of the work in the show from those sessions. I think that's called Morning Shadows. This is Smokehouse. I've forgotten what I called this one, but all studies of these particular buildings. And I do want to say, though, that at the beginning of the pandemic, the shutdown, my husband and I took it upon ourselves to archive all of our prints. And this seemed like it would be an unending task, but it was finite. We did end it. But in the course of it, I realized that my attempts to make art about the things the landscapes I was seeing, actually go back quite a ways. In 1995, I was living in Silver Spring, and I think I was taking the subway to and from town to the job I had downtown. And at that time, there was the Canada Dry bottling plant, I think it was. And I just loved the look of this thing. If anybody remembers the Hoyerick Brewery that used to be down on the waterfront in Georgetown, had the same feel, just magnificent old structure that's falling into disrepair. And I made this etching of this. By this time, I had one etching class, and I learned a little bit how to bite lines into a plate with acid, and in some cases do it quite badly. But I had never learned a thing about how to wipe a plate, or even what constituted a well-wiped etching. And in fact, I wouldn't even call this an etching today. I'd call it a monoprint. And I used to do a lot of monotypes, and there was always a lot of discussion between what is a monotype and what is a monoprint. A monoprint is a plate that has etched lines in it, but then it is, as I would like to say, creatively wiped. And this one was certainly creatively wiped. And I also want to say that this print looks to me, I think it was about 3 inches by 5 inches. But I did the best I could trying to capture this building and the feelings it brought up in me, the fascination. And again, these unusual, the topography right there. I was a graphic designer, and topography is important to me, but the darks and the lights, the delicate lines that I had to help along probably with a toothpick here. This is another view of the same building. I think this is 3 by 4, looks a little more square. And I love the juxtaposition of building elements, interesting lines, the pipes, the way they snake through the composition. But I never felt like I knew what I was doing. And I set this aside for many years. Actually, there was one more I did. This was actually done in 2010. Silver Spring has a number of auto mechanic shops. Most of them are along Selham Road. And I think they were trying at one time to get a historic designation for those auto mechanic shops. They just look like old rasty places to me. But in 2010, behind them in a lot, there was all this fabulous junk, old trucks and a gas pump and just wonderful stuff. And I went by there again very recently, and it's now been emptied out and there are flowers everywhere, and it's kind of lost its appeal to me. But it also seemed very clear to me that I just hadn't a clue how to turn what I was seeing into a visual composition that would keep the eye and draw the eye in. So I went on and I did other things. I mostly did monotypes. I joined the Washington Printmakers Gallery, met some wonderful printmakers there, learned a lot. And this, by the way, another monotype from 2010, that was the thing I did mostly in those years. And I always have loved the tonal possibilities of monotype. This again was a little 3 by 4 or 3 by 5 plate. I was a great fan of and a great devotee of Jack Boole, who of course did monotype brilliantly. And I did that as best I could. But in about 2014, our gallery had moved to Wisconsin Avenue, and about 3 or 4 storefronts up the road from the gallery, Washington Printmakers Gallery, if I didn't say that, was a place called the Bean Counter. It was a little sandwich shop. And you could go in there right in the this is Wisconsin Avenue, right out here. And you could go in the store. They had 2 tables, a little place to order your food. And then if you came out and you did a 180-degree turn, you could come straight down this tunnel to a back courtyard that was shaded wonderfully by old trees, and it was quiet. And so we would eat lunches there many a time. But what really caught my eye is the corrugated metal. and the shadows and just the way the shadows created these diagonals and led the eye. And so I made this, I think it's etching and dry point. I actually engraved into these dark areas as much as I could because I like to have black detail and black marks. And was trying to get at why do these buildings move me so much? I don't think there's anything nostalgic about it. I just think that the visual delight of the textures, the varieties of shapes and lines and tones are just, they're intriguing to me, endlessly intriguing. This was another building I did about that time. This was an old house. Of course, it's a beautiful old house in Georgetown on Prospect Street. But what I was taken with was the metal, I think they call that Fachwerk, and the shadows cast by the dormer windows, and of course the deep shadows under the eaves here. And finally, I did this image of, I think this is either the Nigerian or the Congolese embassy down on 16th Street. No metal work here, but I love the texture of the tiles. It's a wonderful building, marvelous red brick, just gorgeous. And finally, much more recently, I've been back in Silver Spring in the alleys, and there are not too many of these wonderful alleys left. That area is being developed very nicely. And I don't think I got it, but this building backs up to this cinder block wall. And there is a doorway through it. And through that, you can see a little fragment of one of the office buildings. I think contemporary office buildings are so boring. I love contemporary architecture. I think you go to Glenstone in order to see the architecture. And I'm eager to see the renovated Martin Luther King Library as soon as I can figure out how to get down there. But office buildings are just horrible. And yet in Silver Spring, there are still these storefronts that are wedged onto the back of old houses. And about this time, my friend Peggy Parker and I went to the print study room at the National Gallery. We'd gone to try to see some Whistler, but they didn't have much. We ended up looking at a lot of work by John Winkler, who was a master etcher, wonderful etcher. He was born in the 19th century, but he lived until 1979. And observing his work, he would do a thing where he'd use a line to lead your eye into the composition. Then he'd give you some details to take you a little bit further, and then around other lines to take you through the whole composition. And I was trying very hard to sort of follow his example of how you might use elements both descriptively, but then structurally and formally within the composition to make it all work. So that one was incredibly murderous to print. And I am now in the middle of printing this. This is the same alley, but it goes the other way. In fact, it's down here that you would find the previous scene. And I bike through here one morning, and of course the deep shadows here and the incredible shadows cast by this cast iron stairwell. And again, trying to use all of these things, a little bit of detail to take you up and through the composition. I think one of the things I love about these alleys, they are so full of visual stimulus. There's so much to see. And I think too, these older buildings, whether they're rural or urban, show so much of the human usage and of the impact of humans on the buildings. I think in all these cases, there have been ductwork that's been stuck on there, air conditioners stuck on top, electrical lines that probably, I'm sure they meet code of some sort, but I just find it all incredibly fascinating. And I can't not draw it. I have to draw it. And for years, I have been seeing things. As a young child, I remember going with my grandmother into the country, she driving, and seeing trees and thinking, how on earth would you ever do pictures of trees that would somehow catch what it is they make me feel? And the same is true of these places. The alleys don't make me feel the way the trees of Michigan did, but they really, I find them so beautiful and so exciting. And so I'm coming now pretty much to the end. But I did want to say, touching on this matter of, I think the theme of this talk was to be, how has my process changed as I have aged? And I can only say that I never yet gave up. And I have been fortunate to know some wonderful printmakers, and I have learned, and I will hope to continue to do that. And so thank you all very much. I hope this lasted at least 15 minutes. And with that, I will try to shut it down. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Spears. I want to thank Ellen for her presentation. And I also want to thank the Delaplane Arts Center, and in particular, Sydney Dexter, for this solo exhibition of my work. The title of my show is Visual Marks of Rhythm and Melody, a mantra of visual intuitiveness interpretation. For me, music seems to have its own universe governed by rhythm and melody. I, like most people, love music. Music can captivate you if it connects, whether it's rock, pop, jazz, blues, classical, or whatever, because music affects the senses. It can bring up memories. You could say it takes you to another place in time and space, a world I call the parallel world of music. What is rhythm? It's the element of time in music, what you tap your feet to. What is melody? It's the horizontal presentation of pitch, which is no more than a high, low, or low of a musical sound. Although it may sound counterintuitive, for the last 10 years, I have been experimenting with my innate response to music. Yet the essence of it all is listening to a given piece of music countless times, which can amount to hundreds of plays in order to intuitively capture its rhythm and melody. Opus number 18, which I did in 2018, is an example of what I'm talking about. We can go to that painting all the way, the one to the far right. It's a collage and mixed media piece created from listening to the song Do I Do by Stevie Wonder. In this piece, not only was I visually interpreting the music, but the parallel world I was in. The shapes are intuitively rendered in a realm of a floating world of African sensibility, brought on from the sharp percussions often used by composers. The collage pieces of paper rising from the bottom on the left complements its African aesthetic flavor. However, to challenge myself even more, my most recent 5 pieces in this show, I bring lyrics into rhythm and melody. This came about because of a minister, a Dr. Banks, who asked me 3 years ago, when was I going to do something on religion? With no intention of pursuing it, about a year later, it all came to fruition when I noticed a glut of 60s and 70s R&B songs as background music in many commercials. I concluded that these iconic songs were uplifting, radiating hope and a better tomorrow, something I had never noticed growing up in those eras, a good fit for marketing companies. So why not select some noteworthy pieces from this era to visually interpret? Over the span of a year and a half, I created 5 large-scale pieces from this concept. They are, and we'll start with the first one, This Christmas by Donny Hathaway, 1970. You know it's Christmas when all the radio stations start playing it. We can go to that first one, Donny, all the way over to the left, the first one. Yes. Donny Hathaway's grandmother started him on a piano playing gospel at 3 years old. Next one, Harvest to the World, 1976, by the Isley Brothers. The Isley Brothers started out as a gospel group from their church in Dayton, Ohio. The next one, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, in 1971, called the Ecology album and considered one of the best works ever. Marvin Gaye was raised in DC with a preacher for a father. Home by Stephanie Mills, the next one. From The Wizard of Oz in 1976, a song she still sings to this day. Mills was nurtured in a Brooklyn AME church and began singing at 4 years old. The next one, A Change Is Going to Come by Sam Cooke, called the Civil Rights Anthem. Sam Cooke was a gospel singer before a R&B career. He wrote this song in 15 minutes, inspired by being turned away from a hotel in Louisiana. The common denominator for all of these artists is their attachment to the church. Thus, they brought their spiritual side to the secular world of R&B music. Let me use Untitled #1, 64 by 44 mixed media and collage piece to explain my process for these 5 works. The other 4 pieces in this series are oils, but with the same process. But first, let's listen to a little of the music I used for this piece. It's entitled Harvest to the World by the Isley Brothers. It's incalculable the amount of times I listened to the music you just heard, perhaps approaching 1,000 times. I wanted the music soaked into my soul so I could see the rhythm, melody, and lyrics in a narrative yet intuitive fashion, creating the piece's structural feel. For this piece, what I had to do was take in how to make it secular and how to make it spiritual in one piece. And I believe I accomplished that. At the bottom of this piece are abstract shapes of viewers looking at a choir performance. I selected an old woman's dress, a Black old woman of the South dress, as a pattern, as a religious symbol because of their strength women have in the Black church. You see this pattern all throughout the bottom, and you also see this in the chains which are around this person's neck at the top. That is to symbolize that he has the church in him, although he's in the secular world. We also have on the right-hand side, we have a cross that is also around his neck that he's swinging around. We have people who are in the church in abstract form, one with a hat on in the middle at a missionary meeting. I used, this is mixed media, and I used collage, I used wash, I used spray paint, I used pastels, I used and lots of collage and watercolor. So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and this is what we have here. The abstract forms at the top, singers and with the gold chains and a cross swinging around it, is the focal point, so to speak, which drops down into the black. If you will look on your left, the black part that's coming down, that is used as a motion device to bring your eye down. And then you finally settle on seeing the performance with viewers in the church at the bottom. Before I close, let me touch on aging. My major negative is trying to remember. My memory has always been bad, but the older I get, the worse it gets. Physically, you lose power as well. That means you need some form of exercise just to keep up. I used to be able to paint standing up for just about 7 hours at a time, but no more. I don't push myself either. I'll paint for up to 3 hours, then take an hour or two, break, then go back. I have to write more down, although I often forget where I stashed it. I thought I would remember stuff forever, like the music I used on some of my older pieces, because I said I just won't never forget it. But that was a lie. I did. Except for one piece I did in 2016, a piece by 50 Cent called The Club. I think I remember this piece because it's hip hop, something I'm normally not drawn to. Yet I believe that the key to aging is mostly mental. Keep on thinking, keep on creating, challenge yourself with new ideas. To not turn into a grumpy old man or woman because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Do not refuse to change. Respect everyone, including your young people. You can learn a lot from them. And eat healthy. Thank you for listening. And Black lives really do matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you both so much. As both of our solo artists touched on, this month in August is Creative Aging Month. And our creative aging solo artists were invited to have solo exhibitions as companion shows to our annual Over 70 show, which is also available online at Virtual Delaplane. So about now, we would like to start taking questions from the audience. It seems like maybe we should give a little more time for people if they would like to ask questions, but I have a few. As it is Creative Aging Month, and you both discussed some of the benefits and perhaps challenges of aging as an artist, what are perhaps some of the expectations that you had set for yourself at a younger age when you were creating, or maybe even prior to creating, that you would have taken with you when you started your artistic endeavors, that as you've grown into an older age, you have kind of set yourself free from?
Well, I can start with that. I'm Ellen again. As a young person, I had utterly ridiculous expectations of myself and absolutely no knowledge of how to meet those expectations. And indeed, one of the things I've tried to do as I've aged and as I've just gone along as an artist is kind of free myself of those expectations and settle is not the right word, embrace what is in fact actually happening for me as an artist. I remember, some of you will know Lee Newman. He's both a friend, he was a teacher of mine. And I remember the day I gave up trying to be Lee Newman when I was doing etchings. And I still go back to it from time to time, but that resulted in a long spell of very playful work that my husband eventually called the Tiki Town drawings and paintings. But I am influenced by certain artists, and I do find myself drawn to try to work as they do. And I find it really important to acknowledge them, admire them, and let go of the expectation that I can do work like them.
For me, I would say when I was younger, I've always painted or drawn and did something. I got a collection of, I call it now folk art, since I've learned differently, that I started many years ago when I was a young man. But for the most part, I didn't really do what I should have did. I have regrets about not furthering my education more when I was back in the day. I got an associate degree and I started working as a graphic designer, and I was making money and things were going just fine. But I drank too much. I did things that as a young man that you end up regretting if you have any kind of maturity about you. So if I had to go back, I would do things differently, but none of us can go back, can we? So you start to where you're, as my father used to tell me, you are where you are because that's where you're supposed to be. So thank God I did find my true self, and that's when I went back to school in 2006. So I'm pretty happy right now.
I see that a friend of mine who is in the audience has asked a question. Peggy Parker asked me to talk a bit about what artists have most influenced me. Hello, Peggy. As I mentioned, Peggy and I and Lee all were in the same gallery for a spell, and I can't say enough. My husband was in it also, Max Carl Winkler. I can't say enough how much those people influenced me, both in terms of creating a good work ethic, of learning from other artists, of paying attention to what's going on. I of course, I said earlier that I found it hard to get a panoramic view into a print that was 3 inches by 5 inches. Rembrandt, of course, did that all the time. And I never cease to be amazed by his little landscapes, which contain everything. But I have also been deeply influenced, of course, by by Richard Diebenkorn, who does very different work. And I think the artists who really influence me are people who are managing to give a picture of something or other. Usually I'm fonder of the representational work than the abstract work of Diebenkorn at least. But there might be a picture of a person lying on a park bench, or maybe Lee did that, or there may be a landscape out in California, or Peggy has given wonderful images of women, I think in rice paddies, maybe harvesting. So on the one hand, there's the subject matter, but they are rendered in such a way that for a moment, the eye puzzles to know what it is I'm seeing. And I get more caught up in the marks that are made and the lines that zig and zag this way or that, or the shapes that do finally resolve into a building facade. But in that moment where I'm working to figure it out, I'm deeply in the picture at that point, and I'm really deeply into the expressiveness, the gestures of the artists that they've made. So I've been very fortunate to know people who have influenced me, but I would have to say it's probably Diebenkorn, Jack Boole, of course. I must mention him. I guess I went to the old Studio School Gallery many years ago and saw a show of his work, his monotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so taken with those and spent a lot of time trying to master that form. And I think I did okay with it. I don't think I came up to Jack's standards, but I eventually got intrigued with etched lines and stopped doing monotypes. I do them occasionally. They're a wonderful way to make a study of a scene, but I've been very fortunate to know some wonderful artists who I have learned from. So.
Mm-hmm. There are so many artists that I like. I'm not gonna bore you with all of that, but I will tell you that two of my favorites from the Renaissance period is Jacob Lawrence and Romare Bearden. I really like their work. I like the freedom. I like their conceptual work. How they approached it, conceptualizing how they were going to do it. I also like Kandinsky's work. His work, the freedom of his work and the flow of it. Of course, he was into music too, and also contemporary artists. I like Brandon. He's fairly new on the scene, but his work is selling for millions now. So there are so